Welcome back, everyone. We are now on to day 6 of Unit 3. Now, I know this is hard to believe, but we're actually reaching the end of this unit. So you know what that means. Your test is going to be next week. I haven't given you guys the official date announcement yet, but I would say that test is going to be around next Thursday. So aim for next Thursday, and I'll let you know if that changes. All right, so today's aim: how do cellular respiration and photosynthesis work together? So by now, I hope that you know what these two processes are, but let's write down a few important details. So we need to note that cellular respiration happens in both plants and animals. Okay, and photosynthesis, we should note that that only happens in plants. Okay, so today we're going to talk about what each of these processes are and how do they work together? What's the point of it all? But before we get to that, I want you guys to pause this video, answer your to-do now questions, and then press play when you're ready to go over it. So question number 1, which statement best describes cellular respiration? So we should already know, based off what we annotated from our aim, that cellular respiration happens in both plants and animals. But let's see what else we need to know. Is it A, it occurs in animal cells but not in plant cells? B, it converts energy and food into a more usable form? C, it uses carbon dioxide and produces oxygen? Or D, it stores energy and food molecules? So I hope you got that the answer to this question is B. It converts energy and food into a more usable form. So when we're talking about energy and food, we're likely talking about glucose. So glucose goes into the mitochondria and turns it into a more usable form. And that form is ATP, right? We've talked about that cellular energy. ATP is energy that the cell is able to process. So cellular respiration uses glucose to produce ATP. All right, question number 2. Which process usually uses carbon dioxide molecules? Is it A, cellular respiration, B, asexual reproduction, C, active transport, or D, autotrophic nutrition? So you might have taken one glance at this and been like, wait, the answer's not here. I know it's photosynthesis, but where is it? But remember that we talked about autotrophic nutrition. Whenever you see this phrase, automatically just write down photosynthesis. That means the exact same thing. Because autotrophic nutrition, when we're talking about autotrophs, that means things like plants that are able to make their own food. And plants are able to make their own food through none other than photosynthesis. So the answer here is going to be D. This uses carbon dioxide molecules and uses that to produce glucose and oxygen. Right, so you could have written your answers down here. You should have written B and D. All right. Now, part A, write out the formulas of cellular respiration and photosynthesis. So again, cellular respiration happens in both plants and animals, and they use that process to create energy. So the formula that you should know is that the mitochondria is going to take in glucose from the digestive system and oxygen from your breathing. You inhale oxygen, and that's going to go into the mitochondria to produce 3 products. So you're going to first produce ATP, which is that energy that we've talked about. But it's also going to produce 2 waste products. First, CO2, or carbon dioxide, that is then released through your exhale, so you breathe out carbon dioxide, as well as water. But remember that this isn't like buckets or barrels full of water. This is just like a tiny bit of water vapor. And that water vapor is released when you exhale as well. So this is why when you breathe up against a window, that window is going to fog up. That is the water vapor that's being released from your breath. All right, so that is cellular respiration that happens in the mitochondria. Now, photosynthesis. So photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast. Remember, this only happens in plants. We don't have chloroplasts, only plants do. And what photosynthesis does is it takes in, think about the song I sang to you guys, it takes in water, sunlight, and carbon dioxide, right? And it uses those three things to produce glucose, and oxygen. And this process is super important because without glucose and oxygen, we wouldn't make it. So we really have a lot to thank for our plants because they produce glucose and oxygen that we need in order to eat and breathe. All right, so that is photosynthesis. Now, looking at these two formulas, I want you to stop this video and jot down your answer. What do you notice about the reactants and the products of each of these reactions? So remember, again, reactants are what goes into the reaction, and products are what's produced, what comes out. So what do you notice about the reactants and products? So hopefully you notice that they're the same, but backwards. Okay, so let me highlight this, let's see. The products of photosynthesis are the same as the reactants of cellular respiration. And the products of cellular respiration are the same as the reactants of photosynthesis. Right? Now, I want you to, using that information, describe the relationship between cellular respiration and photosynthesis. I said that so weird. Photosynthesis. How do these two processes work together? So you might need to add some more space for you to answer that question on your document. Pause this video, answer that, and then press play for the answer. All right, so hopefully you noticed that what is produced by photosynthesis is able to be used by cellular respiration. Okay, so the products of photosynthesis, so glucose and oxygen, are able to be used by plants and animals to create energy through cellular respiration. Okay, but that also means that the products of cellular respiration namely carbon dioxide and water, are able to be used by plants to undergo photosynthesis. Okay, so what ends up happening is these two processes kind of create this never-ending loop where what is produced by photosynthesis goes directly into cellular respiration, and what's produced by cellular respiration goes directly into photosynthesis. So they feed into each other and create this endless cycle or loop. So I'm going to add that this creates a cycle or loop where these things just keep happening over and over and over because the products of one are needed for the other. All right. Now, if you have any questions about what we've covered so far, please send me a message on Remind and I'll be sure to get back to you. Now, part B, we've got a passage to read. So I'm going to read through this passage and annotate what I think is important. And then we'll work together virtually to fill out the blanks that are missing. All right. So part B, food, matter, and energy. Let's get my highlighter ready. An apple is a type of food. It contains complex organic compounds. Remember, if something is organic, it contains carbon and hydrogen. Its atoms are held together as molecules by chemical bonds that are rich in stored energy. Oh, I want that to be yellow. When you eat an apple, you get both the matter and the energy that you need to build your body to stay alive. The apple tree that produced the fruit represents the groups of organisms that are blank, meaning self-feeding. right? So the blank that's going to go here is autotrophs. Plants are autotrophic organisms. Remember, that means that they automatically make their own food. They do it on their own without any help. Right, so this means that they are self-feeding. They create their own food. They create their own glucose. Like other plants, the apple tree makes its own food, taking in the blank substances, carbon dioxide and water. So you might notice that neither of those compounds contain carbon and hydrogen. That means that those are inorganic substances, meaning that they do not contain carbon and hydrogen. Right? So they take in inorganic substances like CO2 and water and change them into organic compounds, such as sugars and starches. So specifically, the sugar that we're talking about here is glucose, which is going to be C6H12O6. So because it contains both carbon and hydrogen, that is organic. Humans represent the other groups of organisms, which are blank, meaning other feeders. So humans aren't autotrophic. Humans are actually what we call heterotrophic. And this means that we have to eat other organisms to gain energy. So we cannot create our own food. I mean, you can go into the kitchen and cook, but your body's not actually producing glucose that it needs to survive. So we have to eat other organisms to gain energy. All right, so heterotrophic means other feeders. Right, since they cannot make their own food, humans and all other organisms must get their complex organic compounds by eating other organisms. For the apple tree to combine inorganic raw materials of CO2 and H2O into organic compounds, such as sugar and starch, it needs a source of energy. The rays of sunlight, as they fall on the leaves of the apple tree, provide energy. The process of making this food using light as the source of energy is called blank. Hopefully you know that this is photosynthesis. The process of using sunlight to produce food, glucose, is known as photosynthesis. All green plants are photosynthetic autotrophs. That means that they undergo photosynthesis to produce their own food. Without plants to capture the energy of sunlight and convert it into chemical forms that are edible, most humans would have no constant source of food and could not exist. So again, we have a lot to thank plants for, because without them producing glucose, we probably wouldn't be here. So thank a plant next time you see it. All right, now part C. This is a Regents question. These questions have been on Regents exams in the past. So make sure you understand what's going on here, as you may see this again in the spring. So you're given this picture, and we're supposed to base our answer to the questions on the lake ecosystem represented below and on our knowledge of biology. So the first thing we have to do is state one piece of evidence from the diagram that indicates that light penetrates to the bottom of the lake. So you may see that on the floor of this lake, we have some green plants growing. Okay, now that is going to be our evidence that light makes it to the bottom of the lake, because what do plants need in order to photosynthesize? Light. So because the plants, right, there are plants on the bottom of the lake, which means that light reaches them. If it didn't, they wouldn't be able to photosynthesize. Because as you know, if there is no light, photosynthesis can't happen, which means that they're unable to produce their own food that they need to survive. All right, question 2, state the equation for the process by which the duck in the picture obtains energy to swim. So this duck right here is not a plant. He's an animal. Therefore, he has to eat other organisms in order to produce his food. He is a heterotrophic organism. But in order to produce his energy, he has to do something else called cellular respiration. Right? And the formula for cellular respiration is going to be, he takes in glucose and he breathes in oxygen, and he uses those molecules. They go into his mitochondria, and he uses them to produce ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. Right, number 3, state the equation for the process by which the plants in the picture obtain food. So these plants are autotrophic, which means they produce their own food. The process by which they make their own food is photosynthesis. So this equation is going to be basically the opposite of cellular respiration. Those plants take in CO2, they take in water, and they take in the sunlight, and they use those reactants to produce glucose and oxygen. Now, finally, question number 4. Again, you might have to add some space onto your document because it did kind of get cut off there. Number 4, explain how carbohydrates provide energy for life functions. So when we're talking about carbohydrates, we're talking about those organic molecules like sugars and starches. Okay. So whenever you eat carbohydrates, the first thing that your body has to do is break them down. So when you eat, carbohydrates, the digestive system breaks them down into simple sugars or smaller sugars. And that simple sugar might just be glucose. But then what happens to the glucose? So glucose diffuses across your cell membrane, which means it travels into your cells. Where it goes into the mitochondria. And through cellular respiration, is used to produce energy. And that energy form that's used by your cells is, of course, ATP. So that is how carbohydrates provide energy for life functions. You eat them, they're broken down, glucose travels into your mitochondria, where it's then used in cellular respiration to produce energy. Now, of course, it's also important to note that these carbohydrates originally come from plants. So glucose, let me write that down. I'll just add it over here. Glucose comes from plants, right? Because glucose is produced through photosynthesis. All right, now that is all I have for you today. So as always, answer your exit ticket. This is where your grade comes from. So make sure that you open this link, answer the questions, and press submit. So today you have 2 questions. Quickly fill them out, press submit, turn in your notes, and you are good to go. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys tomorrow.